speaker is Dr. Kambon. I would like to say a few words before he comes. Okay. So he's a research fellow who specializes at the Institute of African Studies, who specializes in language, drama, poetry, and social discourse. He teaches Yoruba and also speaks 3 other African languages. Okay, so he speaks Wolof, he speaks Yoruba and speaks Twi as well, and he's from the diaspora. How many languages can you speak? And I'd like you all to clap for him as he comes to take the mic.
Ago. 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 Okay, I was invited to speak here today dealing with the topic of harnessing our culture for national development. I finished my PhD here at the University of Ghana in linguistics. So of course I'm always looking at the language of some of these things. What are we talking about when we say our culture? So that takes us to the question of what is culture? What is culture? And I have a quote from a noted psychologist of the diaspora, an African psychologist of the diaspora, Amos Wilson. If you don't know him, you should know him. And he says that from their life experiences, a group develops a set of rules and procedures for meeting their needs. The set of rules and procedures together with a supporting set of ideas and values is what we call a culture. Other ideas, Stephen Biko also has ideas about what culture is. He says a culture is essentially the society's composite answer to the varied problems of life. So culture thus is functional, right? Also, Amilcar Cabral of Guinea-Bissau, he says that culture is simultaneously the fruit of a people's history and a determinant of history by the positive or negative influence which it exerts on the evolution of relationships between man and his environment, among men or groups of men within a society, as well as among different societies, if imperialist domination has the vital need to practice cultural oppression, therefore national liberation is necessarily an act of culture. This means that if someone has to oppress your culture in order to dominate you, when you want to get your liberation, it means that your culture has to fight back against those types of things. And then finally, Frantz Fanon also talks about a national culture is the whole body of efforts made by a people in the sphere of thought to describe, justify, and praise the action through which that people has created itself and keeps itself in existence. And Cabral says, without any doubt, underestimation of the cultural values of African peoples based upon racist feelings and upon the intention of perpetuating foreign exploitation of Africans has done much harm to Africans and Africa. So as we are talking about, it's intentional that many of us don't know about our culture and don't know about who we are. So when they have the intention to make you oppressed, they have the intention also of not letting you know about our culture. So that brings us to the question of who or what is included when we talk about our culture. So I want to come here to the map, and this map may be familiar. We talk about these colonial borders. Does anyone recognize this tiny speck here on the map here? What do we call that? We call it Ghana. At the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885, these borders were given to you not by your benefactors but by your enemies. And this is the colonial era. And we see not much has changed because this tiny speck here is still what we call what? Ghana. So our borders, our boundaries were not determined by us. So therefore, if we're talking about our culture, why would we accept that our culture is limited to these teeny tiny borders that were forced upon us? that none of us were invited to in order to determine them. It's a question. So I have a few proverbs, African proverbs, in translation for you. And when I say the proverb, I want you to think about it. I want to know you're thinking about it. So after I say the proverb, I want you to say, Can you do that for me? Let's try that one time. Oh, you are thinkers. You are thinkers. I can tell. The palm wine must have gotten around to the audience. So the first one is, this is a bit mathematical. So we'll see who did well at mathematics, as was discussed earlier. It is said, the one who prescribes the diameter of your knowledge determines the circumference of your experience. Now I know you're thinking about it. The one who prescribes the diameter of your knowledge controls the circumference of your experience. That's one. The next proverb is, a cow grazes where it is tied. A cow grazes where it is tied. The next is, cattle is only as good as the field in which it grazes. Cattle is only as good as the field in which it grazes. Let me hear it. We should be thinking, you say, he came to give a talk on culture. He's now talking about the Mwa people, these animal engineers. Not necessarily. Also, the proverb, the dog does not prefer bones to meat. It is just that no one ever gives him meat. Who determined our borders for us? Also, you are the slave of the one whose handcuffs are on your wrists. I want you to give all of these some thought, and I'll tie it back into what we're discussing today. So this is accepting others' definition of us. And this one is the training of elephants. And I won't quote it word for word, but essentially it says that in the circus, is everyone familiar with the circus? Clowns, elephants, lions, tigers, bears, oh my. That they say that when they train elephants, they start them off very young, and they will put something like a heavy metal shackle on their leg. And the elephant will try to get free. Eventually, it realizes that it is futile, that it can't get free. And at that point, once the elephant grows, it has been so trained and mentally conditioned that it says, oh, it's futile. You can keep it there with just a stake and a rope. You should think about your stakeholders. What does that mean when we talk about our stakeholders? Who is holding our stakes firmly in the ground? Okay? So, I want to ask you, archaeology students, are you a cow? No. Okay, wonderful. That was the answer I was hoping for. Are you a broken elephant? Anyone? Show of hands, anyone? So if the cow grazes where it is tied, we should wonder about these borders that we've inherited. We'll continue. So, what therefore should be your sphere, your scope of research? Should it be only these teeny tiny borders that we inherited from our colonial enemies? Perhaps not. Then what's the alternative? Perhaps it is the global African world. The global African world. Now you can see this map. First, it's a Peterson projection map instead of the Mercator map, because this shows more of a true view of the size of Africa in relation to the rest of the world. The Mercator map shows Europe huge, Greenland huge, Iceland, all of these huge. But these are teeny tiny specks on the map. And you may also wonder something. You'll say, was this prepared for the Amamre troop when they were upside down? And I will tell you, no, I'm actually turning you right side up. I'll explain. But before I do that, you notice the red, black, and green here at the top. And also the red, black, and green that I'm wearing. Yeah. If you ever wonder why all of the flags in Africa, so many of them are red, black, and green, this goes to the idea of the global African world. The flag introduced by Marcus Garvey, also the Black Star Line introduced by Marcus Garvey. If you don't know about these things, hopefully, I should not come from African studies to archaeology to tell you these things. I hope everyone already knows all of this. Yes, exactly. So why are we turning it right side up? You notice that here the east is on the left and the west is on the right. Perhaps our speaker before, he mentioned if these departments come together, it will turn the world upside down. I will show you that that perhaps is what needs to happen. Once we know our own languages, and first I'll ask you, does anyone know how to read or write? Is anyone literate here? Do we know how to read or write? By show of hands, please. 1, 2, at least 3, 4. Okay, at least 5 people know how to read or write. Wonderful. So I'll ask you to read this in our own languages. I'm coming to archaeology, and I would expect we know this, that in our own languages, such as Medu Neter, what the Greeks called hieroglyphics, that the same word that was used for east is the word that was used for left. This tells us something about our orientation, that east is left, just as we saw on the map when it is turned right side up. This is our orientation, our proper orientation as African people. So you see here the spear decked out as a standard, that Iabit is east, and also Iab is left-handed, right? This tells us something about how we as African people see the world and how our world has been turned upside down, our world view. But that's not all. You also see that the word for west is right. And I'm showing you something of an archaeological artifact here, where you can see it actually carved into stone. Your ancestors carved it into stone so that you would not forget. And I hope everyone can read this. If not, the hands that went up when I asked, do people know how to read and write? Those hands should go down until we know how to read and write. But we see here the emblem of the west. Imenet is west. And then also it is the word for right. This tells us that the left is to our east and the west is to our right. So why did the people of ancient Kemet, the land of the blacks, put it like this? Because their orientation was facing towards their origin, their source, further into the interior of Africa where we came from. I'll continue. Also, it will intrigue you to see this carved into stone again, where you see here, the emblem of the east is here on your left, and the emblem of the west is here on your right. And this is from the tomb of Ramesses III, and it is a temple to Khonsu, who was associated with the moon. We'll continue. Also, it will interest you to know that north in our language is lower. 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 That means that this is the low part, what is in the north, and we can see this here as well. The word here, the king of Lower Egypt, lower, right? And this is the word for the delta. This is what is here in the north, right? So also, the word for upper is the south. So the south is upper, and you see this here as well. Resut is the word for south. Resut is the word for south, and it is also our upper Egypt, as we see here, upper Egypt, right? So what does this tell us? This tells us something about once we know our culture is not limited to these tiny boundaries, then we can say that what was going on in the Nile Valley is part of what? Our culture. I'll continue. Also, you will say, well, who are these people in the Nile Valley? I've looked at the football matches and I see the Egyptians playing, and they look like Arabs. Hopefully we know more about our history to know that these are recent imperialists who have stolen our African land. Very good. So the word Kim is black. The word Kemet translates, that is our indigenous word for ancient Egypt. It translates to the black land, also Egypt. and it's also used for Egyptians. The word that we ourselves used for ourselves at that time was black people. Our indigenous word for ourselves as Egyptians, quote unquote, was black people. It meant black people. Now you'll probably say, oh, well, maybe they weren't black, or I don't know. But the idea is this exact same meaning of Abibimine and Abibifor. The Bibi means black. So Kemet as a land is the exact same meaning as Abibimine. And Kemet as people is the exact same meaning as Abibifor. And just so that you can't get it mixed up, also the word for citizens, Remech. So you see this here, and I will show it to you. I know you're interested in archaeological artifacts. So I'll show you an actual artifact. So you see this Remech. This is the word for Egyptians, also for man and mankind. So you'll say, well, can I get a picture? Can I get an illustration of what our African ancestors were talking about? Well, they showed you very clearly. This jet black man here has the word Remech written right beside him. So here are the Tamahu. This is what's called the mural of the races in the tomb of Ramesses. So here, the Tamahu, these are the Libyans. Here, the Nehesu, these are the Nubians. Here, the Amu, these are the Asiatics. And then here, the Remech, just as we saw it. This is how we depicted ourselves as Egyptians. And you will see that how we depicted ourselves as Egyptians, Remech, is the exact same as we depicted the Nubians. Both jet black. How come we aren't told this from primary? If you know that your ancestors are the ones who built the pyramids, don't you think it would be something that would help you to know? Yeah, especially as archaeologists. Yes. I'll show you another picture of Remech, and you can see it written here, carved into the stone, and this is an actual photo, not an illustration here. So this is a photo from the tomb of Ramesses II. You see again Remech, and what do they look like? They are blacker than all of you here, even in the nighttime. Exactly. So this is how your African ancestors wanted to make sure you would never forget what you did in the ancient past. All right? And they gave you, and you know, they talk about photos, but this is even better than a photo. This is a stone carving, right? They have Photoshop, right, where you can change things, but they don't have Stone Shop. They can't change the stones. Very good. Your ancestors were even smarter. That's for real. Yet and still, white historians be like, the Egyptians aren't black. Now look at Queen T, the mother of the originator of monotheism. Monotheism, it translates to belief in one God, right? This is the mother of the inventor of monotheism, and she looks just like my wife. Jet black and beautiful. Look at all these black African faces, and yet and still the white historians say, no, they were Caucasians, but they were just very dark. This is the psychotic Ku Klux Klan of academia who is trying to lynch your ancient African ancestors every time they say these jet black people are white people. Don't let them do it. You are archaeologists. Don't let them do it. And you can see images of the Nubians, one type, of the people of Kemet, here, and then you can see the Libyans and then the Asian Caucasoids. So you can see ancient examples as we wrote it, and you can also see the modern day examples still here. We'll continue. So when we talk about our culture, are we only talking about what's in the boundaries that were forced upon us at the Berlin Conference? No. Even though we have wonderful things in Ghana, we have the Kintampo complex, we see Asante Efie, Abosom Fie, Besiase, so we can see these things. If you go to the village today, you will see some of the walls cracking and all these things. But if you look at the ancient pictures, you will see all of these Adinkra symbols elaborately carved in there. So what you see there now in the village isn't what you used to see there. So let's make sure that we don't get it twisted. We can also talk about, we have the Larabanga Mosque, we have so many things, Bego, we have so many sites. But if we can cross those boundaries when we realize that we are not cows and broken elephants, then we can even cross north into Bobo Dioulasso and see one even bigger. The Bobo Dioulasso of Burkina Faso Grand Mosque. We can even go further north to Djenné, to the Great Mosque at Djenné, which you can fit both of the previous two inside of this one. Let's do some thinking. We can also see the great stone structures such as Great Zimbabwe. I know I'm talking to archaeologists, so I wanted to bring some architecture to you. You can look at these great stone structures such as Great Zimbabwe, all made out of stone without any mortar in between. That's how precise we were in measuring each one of the stones. We can look at the ruins of Carthage. Carthage, which fought and defeated the Romans many times under the leader Hannibal. Hopefully we know about all of this. This should just be a review. We can look at the Fasilides Palace here in Gondar, Ethiopia. I hope we know about these things. We can look at the Lalibela Monolithic Church. Once we know that our culture isn't limited to these teeny tiny boundaries and we know we're not cows, then we can say this too is part of our culture. We can look at the Aksum obelisk, or as it was called by your ancestors, the Tekken. Tekken is how we would read that. We can also look at the very original step pyramid. And earlier it was mentioned the Pythagorean theorem, Pythagoras theorem, right? It would interest you to know that Pythagoras came to the Nile Valley, ancient Egypt, Kemet, to study. Because how can you build pyramids without understanding how to do the so-called Pythagorean theorem? So we got done building pyramids long before Pythagoras ever existed.
That's true.
And sometimes I ask my students in Intro to African Studies, what country has the most pyramids? Who knows?
Sudan.
Sudan. Yes, he's coming from African Studies. Don't cut off the archaeologists. I know they know. And I want you to also notice these two pillars here in the front. And this lets you know that it's a temple balanced on both sides, right? Showing ma'at and balance. And this is what the pyramids look like there in Sudan. There are more in Sudan than there are in modern Egypt. We can also look at Ganuar Amina, the Zaria city wall. Look at how huge this is. We talk about the Great Wall of China, but look at what our African ancestors were doing. We can look at the pyramids, the Mur of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, right? How do we do that without knowing what a triangle is? Wonderful question. We can also look at the Great Sphinx, also known as Hor-Im-Akhet, Horus on the horizon. For those of you who have heard of Jesus, the whole story of Jesus is derived from the story of Horus. Those who plagiarize your writing systems and then made sure you don't know how to read and write, they know that. How come we don't know that? We can also look at the temples of Waset, so-called Thebes as they call it. So look at these great temples, and just as I said earlier to make a note of those two pillars in the front, this is what those pillars looked enlarged right here in Upper Kemet. And sometimes we talk about Roman, these columns that they have in front of buildings. Well, look at the original columns. This is a temple of Hatshepsut, a female ruler. Oh yes, we had many female rulers. I hope we already know this. This is just a review. We can also look at other temples here at Luxor and Karnak with the ram standing for Imun. Anytime you pray and you say Amen, you are talking about your ancient deity. Whenever you say Onyame, whenever you say Kwame, whenever you say Ya Amen, all of this is talking about what is symbolized by these rams. I hope we already know this. And we can look at the temples of Ramesses. Here, the Hut. These are the house temples and tombs. So here on the left-hand side, we see the big one, and on the right-hand side, we see the small one. Even when we do it small, we do it big. This is our culture, as long as we don't accept these teeny tiny boundaries that were forced upon us. But what about the Americas? How many people are aware that Africans traveled to the Americas long before any European? I hope we know. We have one hand here in the back. If you don't know, your ancestors wanted to make sure you didn't forget, so they carved multi-ton stone heads of themselves. Look at the lips on this brother. Look at the nose here. He looks handsome, like me. Yes, he looks just like me. Oh, my brother here. Yes. And I want to thank Amamure Group. They performed my entire presentation. That is the whole point of my presentation. So look at these heads. And the white historians, again, they say, oh no, these aren't black people. Well, how do you explain this afro? Huh? This fro looks like my brother here on the front row. Look at this. The lips, the nose. This is you. Your African ancestors wanted to make sure that you wouldn't forget. Abubakar II abdicated the throne and gave it to Mansa Musa just so that he could travel across the Atlantic as so many Africans had done before him. This is testified by Mansa Musa himself. I hope we know this. And look at how big this head is compared to these colonial enemies who are sitting on top of it in the left-hand side. And also, this is what they call the Negroid magician. You see he has mpese, just like me. All throughout the entire continent, all the way back going more than 10,000 years ago, as soon as you see this, you know what this is Okomfo, you know what this is Obosomfo. In South Africa they call it Sangoma, Yoruba, Dada Oluwayo, right? All throughout the world, the African world, it means the same thing. But you see it, you say, oh, Rasta, Jamaica. I say, these people are lost. We continue as we come to wrap it up. And this is the Great Pyramids of the Olmec. This is the original Great Pyramid. So the Africans who built the original pyramids, such as Imhotep, who was the architect of the first pyramid, they said, oh, let's cross the Atlantic and show you how to do your own. Also look at Asia, the original black depiction of Buddha, coming out of India, traveling into China. And look at what the original image looked like before they made him look Chinese like themselves, the Mongoloids. Look at these lips, look at this nose. Look at these lips, look at this nose, look at the hair. His hair, I can do this with my hair, and you will call me Buddha. Look at this African hair. Is there any mistaking? It looks just like the Olmecs. So you know that we had the global African world on lockdown, and we can do it again. And finally, we come to the US. The Africans who built things like the US Capitol. No, Europeans didn't build any of the things that you talk about you want to go and see. They didn't build any of them. This is built by African people, the US Capitol. Sometimes they talk about Barack Obama being the first African American in the White House. No, we built it, as I will show you. And these are the Africans who also constructed the White House. Early and modern, right? And if you want to know how to build those columns that the Romans stole, we'll go to the original Africans who built the columns, right? This is archaeology and African studies and performing arts. And finally, we come to the Washington Monument. If you want to know how to build a Tekken, we'll go to the first original Africans who built the original Tekken, right? And now you will see this. And you'll notice that I lowercase Washington. That's on purpose. I'm a scholar, but we don't give any reverence to criminals, such as the US government. The most notorious criminal organization, along with perhaps and the British Royal Crown. So you will ask me, what is the role of the student? Well, I will say the role of the student is harnessing our culture in the broad sense, not only in these teeny tiny borders that the Europeans forced upon us, harnessing our global African culture for our development, and understanding and helping others to understand what culture means, as we gave definitions, understanding and helping others to understand the totality of the our in our culture. I don't want you to look at Zimbabwe and say, oh, that's what someone else did. That's what those you should say that's what we did. For me, I speak Chi, Mete Chi. Mogbo Yoruba. Degna Olof, I speak Wolof as well. Naweza sema Kiswahili. I can speak Kiswahili. Ndenda Vova Kikongo. I can speak Kikongo. Why? Because all of those are my language, not someone else's language. So once we know this, we will move beyond the ropes, the stakes of the Berlin Conference and heritage boundaries to embrace the global African world for global African liberation. Abibiyase, Abibifahundi. So in conclusion, I would like to say, Dua, Bedamwase. Nyeyi wala don akweka kaka. Jerejef eshe asantini sana matondo mamingi. And we'll close with the references.
Folk Music and Dance Ensemble. We really appreciate your effort. Thank you.